What was your favorite piece of theater that you saw in 2024? Because theater goers were thriving last year. As an avid theater goer myself, I saw 303 shows. Yes, that is a lot. 301 of those were in person because we love a digital option. 263 were unique titles because I'm always a sucker for a repeat visit to something that I know I'm going to love. And 205 of them were titles new to me that I was seeing for the first time in any capacity. And out of all of that theater, there was a lot that I loved. So here are my top 10s of 2024. My top 10 plays, my top 10 musicals, my top 10 revisits of shows that I had seen before but really blew me away upon a second visit, and my top 10 biggest disappointments because it wasn't all good in 2024. There was definitely some duds. But before we get started, if this is your first time seeing me, my name is Kate Reinking. I am a content creator and theater critic. And when I say theater is life, it is not an exaggeration. I see a wild amount of theater. And here's the good and the not so good of what I saw last year. Now, a quick disclaimer for how I personally compile my top 10 list at the end of each year. 1, in order to qualify for my top 10 plays or top 10 musicals, it has to be a full production. So I'm not going to count any workshop presentations that I saw. And it has to be a show that didn't qualify for a previous year that I did a top 10 list. For example, I saw The Notebook in 2022 out of town in Chicago. It made my top 10 musicals list, so it would not qualify for my top 10 this year, despite me seeing it again on Broadway and absolutely loving it. I love that show. However, if it's a revival of a show that I have seen before and it's my first time seeing that specific production, then it would in fact qualify for this list. Which is why this year I am also doing my top 10 revisits. So diving right in, here are my top 10 shows that I had seen in a previous year that I saw again and completely changed my mind on, or it just continues to be a fantastic show. And unfortunately, my one honorable mention on here is in fact The Notebook. I love this show. It's one of my favorite new musicals, but for me, it just didn't change enough from its out-of-town tryout to the Broadway production, despite the fact that it did improve from its out-of-town tryout. It got new cast members that I thought were a really good fit for the show. They added new songs that I thought were really great at establishing the characters and their story arcs. But ultimately, the production itself was just missing a few things, and it didn't have space on this list. But starting off with my top 10 revisits, at number 10, I have a tie between Sus and The Outsiders. Out of all of the shows this season, a lot of the new musicals in the 23-24 season had a huge glow up from their out-of-town or off-Broadway runs to Broadway, but none more so than Sus and The Outsiders. Now, both of these, in my opinion, could have done a little more work. I do think that the 23-24 season was a season full of 4-star new musicals. None of the new musicals quite hit 5 stars for me, but a lot of them did a lot of work to improve from their pre-Broadway to Broadway runs. In the case of Sus, it absolutely was in the writing. Shayna Taub really dug into the writing of this show, gave it a firmer structure, and really established the characters a little better. I still had issues with the production as a whole, specifically with the scenic design and the direction, but Sus is now a musical that, because of the work that Shayna Taub did on it, is going to be huge in regional theaters. I cannot wait to see it regionally. On the flip side of that, you have The Outsiders, which I honestly don't think is the strongest written musical, but what the design team and the Cooperman brothers did in terms of the choreography and Danya Tamor did in terms of the direction, this had a huge glow up from its La Jolla Playhouse production to Broadway, specifically with the scenic design. The church sequence alone, incredible upgrade. They also did a lot of rewriting in terms of the framing device of this show that I do think works a lot better for the current Broadway production, and overall I think it's a much better show than it was originally. The team here truly put in the work, and it absolutely deserved that Best Musical win at the Tony Awards. At number 9, I have the Kimberly Akimbo Tour. Now, Kimberly Akimbo is one of my favorite new musicals. I love Janine Montessori. I love David Lindsay-Abaire. I think Jessica Stone is one of our most promising new musical theater directors, especially here and her work on Water for Elephants. And I really, really, really love this show, but I was worried in it going on tour to some of these really big auditoriums that it would be swallowed up. It was not at all. They did some minor tweaks to the scenic design, and overall that, with the fact that it's just a really good show, it really works even in some of these larger houses. And this touring cast is spectacular, led by Carolee Carmello, who is stellar. Even her alternate Valerie Wright is also amazing. And the entire supporting cast, from the perfect Miguel Gil as Seth to the absolutely hilarious and yet somewhat heartbreaking Dana Steingold, the touring production is just stellar. I loved getting to revisit this show, and I love that cities across the country get to see this fantastic production of a fantastic musical. At number 8, I have Two Strangers Carry a Cake Across New York. I am so glad that I got to see the West End production of the show that I had previously seen off West End at the Kiln Theater. This show barely missed my top 10 musicals last year. I really loved it, but I loved it even more upon a rewatch. It's a very simple two-hander of a musical following Dougal, who comes from the UK to New York to attend his father's wedding. He has not kept in touch with his father. His father invited him to this wedding out of the blue, and he shows up and is picked up at the airport by his future aunt Robin. And this entire musical follows the weekend that he spends in town and the relationship that they form together. The premise is very simple, but the plot is full of twists and turns, and it's such a heartwarming musical. I compare this musical to like the musical equivalent of a hot cup of cocoa on a snowy winter day. And this year we got both a cast recording and the West End production, and I loved getting to revisit this show. And overall, it's just a really good production. The design is really stellar, especially for a two-hander musical. The cast is incredible, and I hope that we see a production of this in New York, because I think it would work perfectly in New York. At number 7 is Moulin Rouge. Now, I know what you're probably thinking. Moulin Rouge is a kind of a mess of a musical. It's not the greatest adaptation of what I think is a absolutely fantastic film, but if you have not seen it with the current cast of John Cardoza and Saleha Pfeiffer, do yourself a favor and go see it with them in it. They really changed the game for me. Now, I always had mixed feelings about Moulin Rouge as a show. I think the things that it does well, it does incredibly well. Backstage Romance, in my opinion, is one of the best Act 2 openers. The design, especially in the Broadway production, is incredibly well done, and I think Alex Timbers is a really strong director. The first time I saw this show on Broadway, I did not like it, and I think part of that was my expectations of loving the movie and seeing all of the changes that they made to the movie. The ending still doesn't quite work for me, and one of the things that never worked for me was Firework. It kind of felt shoehorned in. Well, I'm happy to say that Saleha Pfeiffer makes Firework work. Her interpretation of that song works on a level that I've never seen it work any time before. That song usually gets laughter from the audience, and she breaks your heart immediately upon starting to sing that song, that the audience, silent. Absolutely silent. It has worked in the show in a way that it has never worked for me before. I also think her and John Cardoza have great chemistry together, which really helps for the show to work overall. I'm glad I revisited it. It has never been as good as it is right now. So go see John Cardoza and Saleha Pfeiffer if you can before they leave the show. And if you can't, go see them in anything else. They've literally been fantastic in everything that I see them in. At number 6, I have The Company Tour. Now, Company was a show that I loved on Broadway, and I adored it on tour. I think it toured really well, from the way that they restaged it for touring houses to the entire cast, especially Matt Rodin's Jamie and Brittany Coleman's Bobby, just stellar. I loved this show so much that I saw it 4 times in the 2 weeks that it was in Colorado. And it's the first show that I saw twice in one day since I did that with Titleist Show on Broadway over 15 years ago. So I really loved this production. Sadly, the tour has closed, but I think Company as a whole is just a great Sondheim show. This was also my first time seeing it over the age of 35, and it just hits harder. At number 5, I have Cabaret. I hated this production when I saw it in the West End. like vehemently hated it, which I know is a hot take. And I think part of that was the high expectations that I went going into it. And also, I just don't think I saw a good cast. And one of the things that I said after leaving the show was, wow, I think I need to see it on Broadway because I want to see it with a better cast. But I also had issues with the production as a whole. However, upon revisiting it on Broadway, I am happy to say I see the vision. I see the vision that Rebecca Frecknell was going for. The production overall works a lot better in my opinion, and I think a lot of that is due to the Broadway cast. This was also my first time seeing Eddie Redmayne, and he really cemented what I think Rebecca Frecknell was going for in this MC with this production. He really drove it home for me. I understood it. I understood it in a way that I did not before. And no offense to the cast that I saw in the West End, but sometimes being talented isn't enough. You also have to be the right fit for the overall vision of the director, and Eddie Redmayne absolutely was that for me. I then went and revisited the show with Adam Lambert and Ali Cravalho, and they were absolutely fantastic as well. I'm really glad I took a chance and revisited this show. It's still not my favorite production of Cabaret as a whole, but it really works for me in a way that it didn't before. And also, I think it works even better given recent events in the US. I think post-election, this revival is even stronger than it was before. At number 4, I have Stereophonic. Stereophonic was my number 2 top 10 play of 2023 at Playwrights Horizons, and I loved getting to revisit this on Broadway. I think overall, the score is one of my favorite scores written for the theater. I'm not mad that Shayna Taub won the Tony Award, but gosh, the score for Stereophonic is so well done. This is hands down my favorite cast recording of a show, and that original Broadway cast was magic, putting together 7 people that worked so well together. And David Ajmi's writing in this, stellar. And I get why people don't like it, right? It's a very long play. It's very fly on the wall. It doesn't tell you outright what the overall point of the entire show is. But for me, it just worked so well as a piece and a look at the creative process and all of the blood, sweat, and tears that goes into creating something. And in my opinion, the length is completely justified. It is long. I wouldn't have it any other way. I adore this show. At number 3, I have Merrily We Roll Along, which was one of my top 10 musicals of 2023, and I loved getting to see it again on Broadway. This cast, absolutely magic, and justice for Maria Friedman. Again, I think Danya Tamor and the work that she did on The Outsiders is incredible. I'm not mad that she won, but Maria Friedman and the magic that she did with this Merrily We Roll Along revival, it was incredible. Like, it needs to be studied. She did such a good job here and really made a show that, in my opinion, is not really a strong show overall, but has an incredible score, but she really made it work in a way that it has never worked for me before. And a lot of that has to do with the casting here, not just the trio, but the entire cast as a whole. Also, the design, absolutely impeccable. I could talk about these costumes and the way that they use black and white versus neutral tones forever. I am so glad that they filmed this production. I hope that the pro shot ends up being widely available soon because I need more people to see how good this production was. At number 2, I have Hadestown, which may be one of my favorite musicals of all time. It's definitely top 5. But in 2024, Hadestown kept us fed with Jordan Fisher all year opposite a slew of incredible Eurydices on Broadway. We got the West End production with the incredible original West End cast and the final first national tour cast across the country who were incredible. Will Mann is maybe my favorite Hermes that I've ever seen. No matter where you saw Hadestown this year, you were seeing a great show. And then even at the end of the year, we got the non-equity tour that I have not seen, but the new staging that I've seen in Slimes looks incredible. I need to catch it sometime in 2025. Hello from Editing Kate. It has taken me so long to edit this video that in fact I have seen the Hadestown non-equity tour now, and that cast, absolutely insane. Especially Nicholas Cullen, who's playing Hades, may have my favorite rendition of his Kiss the Riot that I've ever seen. Like, that to me is a skip track, and I can't stop thinking about his version. It was so good. Anyway, back to this video that you're hopefully seeing in March, maybe? Hadestown in 2024 really shined. They said we're turning 5 and went all out. I love how well this show is aging, and if you have not seen Hadestown, or if you saw it the first year, go see it again. This is your sign to go see it again, whether in London, on Broadway, or somewhere across the country. And at number 1, it's Sunset Boulevard. Sunset Boulevard. Sunset Boulevard was my number 1 musical of 2023, and getting to revisit it on Broadway, again, one of my favorite shows. I absolutely love this revival. It is a masterful revival of a show that I actually care nothing about. I don't even like Sunset Boulevard as a show. I can't listen to the original cast recording. But what Jamie Lloyd and the entire team have done here with this revival is nothing short of a masterpiece, in my opinion. Just the attention to detail, the way that even though the set is very minimal, this revival feels anything but. The camera work in this is stunning, and the way that they use camera work to enhance the text of the piece that, again, I don't think is very strong. Of course, you have Nicole Scherzinger giving the performance of a lifetime, but even Mandy Gonzalez, the guest star Norma, is also incredible. And of course, Tom Francis, who is absolutely holding his own on that stage. What a Broadway debut for him. Every member of this cast, all the way down to the ensemble, just, if you have not seen this revival, do yourself a favor and do it. It is definitely not for everyone, right? It's very out there, it's very avant-garde, but even if you don't like this production, I think there's something to take away from just how well it is put together, at the very least. Now, before I get into my top 10 plays and top 10 musicals of the year, we're gonna go a little negative and talk about my top 10 disappointments. Now, these are not the worst shows that I saw this year by any means. These were just the shows that ended up being disappointing to me personally. And of course, taste is subjective, and I love a lot of the people working on these shows, but these are just shows that really kind of let me down in 2024, and a lot of that has to do in some cases with my expectations going into them. Now, as a personal rule for this, I don't do any shows that are currently in development or by new musical theater writers. I try to keep it all to just shows that I see on Broadway or in the West End, though there are a couple exceptions for some like established pieces of theater that I saw this year, but definitely nothing that's in development, because theater is hard enough to create as it is, and I don't want to tear something down while it's still being worked on. But starting at number 10, I have Tammy Faye. Now, Tammy Faye would not have made this list if I hadn't gone back and seen it again. I actually really liked Tammy Faye the first time I saw it, and I think part of that had to do with the fact that I went in with like super low expectations, and I also knew absolutely nothing about Tammy Faye. I went with a friend, we both like campy musicals, we both had a fantastic time, and then I went back again by myself, sat in the back of the theater, knew exactly what I was getting into, had researched a little bit about Tammy Faye, and my experience with the show could not have been more different from the first time I saw it. It was a miserable theater going experience, to the point that I felt bad for all of the actors on that stage. I think part of it too was the first time I saw it was early in previews, and so I saw what they were going for. It had elements of camp in it, but it also had a lot of really serious moments, and I was like, oh, well, maybe as it goes through its preview process, it will lean into the camp a little more, because I think that there's something there. Like, it can be a very fun and campy show. Unfortunately, when I went back again, they had leaned away from the camp. When I saw it the first time, there was a whole sequence where Tammy Faye was literally popping pills and basically did an entire number high, and that was gone when I went back. They had cut that, and I was like, why would you cut the over-the-top things? The energy wasn't there, and it really helped to highlight some of the issues that I have with the overall writing and design of the show. This was such a huge miss for me, which is sad because I think that the show itself had a lot of potential, and that cast was so completely talented, and I thought the direction, some of the choices made in the direction were really strong. It just overall, the vision just wasn't there. At number 9, I have Lempicka, and this one breaks my heart because honestly, this is maybe one of my new favorite scores. I love this cast recording. I compiled a list of my top 10 cast recordings of 2024, and Lempicka was on it because I can't stop listening to this. The music is so good, but this production was such a letdown. And I think part of that had to do with my expectations going into this because it had a cast that I really love. A lot of people working on this show were people whose work I had loved in a previous capacity. Rachel Chavkin is one of my favorite directors with Hadestown, but this show overall just really was such a huge disappointment for me. The book I thought was a mess. I didn't care about the characters that I needed to care about. And while the scenic design and some of the costume design was doing some really cool things, I thought that there were definitely shots in this musical that were stunning to see, but cohesively it just didn't work for me. But my biggest issue with this show as a whole is that at the top of the musical, in literally the framing device, we see Lempicka talk to the audience about, hey, have you ever had the misfortune of falling in love with two people at the same time? And then it proceeds to only get us to care about one of those people. We never cared about her husband in the same way that we cared about Rafaela. And that to me was the biggest downfall of this show as a whole, especially considering that the one scene that Rafaela and Lempicka's husband have together is one of the strongest scenes in the show. What she sees is like one of the best songs. And I think that if they had really established and gotten us to care about both of the relationships in her life, it would have been a stronger show. But instead, it just ended up being one of my biggest disappointments. And primarily because, again, of that potential, because of the potential that I saw with the team, with the story, with how good that score is. What a letdown. At number 8, I have The Wiz. Now, I like The Wiz as a show. I love The Wiz as a movie. And so I was really excited to see a really good revival of this show. I think we were due for one. And the cast that they got are incredibly talented, but the vision for this production overall just was not there. Now, this is a production that was designed as a national tour. So a lot of the set was very minimal, but I've seen national tours with elaborate sets that are still able to tour, where the sets don't feel completely empty when you have all of the actors on stage, and this revival just felt empty. It was primarily a lot of animated backgrounds where the animation was so bad that there was a whole discourse about whether or not it was AI. It isn't AI, it's just not good CGI. And then oftentimes you had a completely bare stage where we could have at least had something on that stage to fill in the rest of the scene. And there were moments where we got this, but not nearly enough. There were some design choices that were also really cool, but overall the show itself just didn't feel cohesive, to the point that even the actors, who I thought individually were giving really good performances, but they all felt like they were in a different show. It didn't feel like they understood what the assignment was overall. I really wanted to like this revival, and I think there was a lot of potential there, but it was just a huge miss for me. At number 7, I have Your Lie in April, which was a new musical that had a very brief run in the West End based off of the manga and anime of the same name. And there was very little I liked about this musical. The story itself was kind of all over the place. It was about this teenage boy who stops playing the violin despite being a prodigy after his mother passes away. And then this girl walks into his life and gets him to play again, but she, tells him a lie at the beginning of their relationship that is not worth the reveal at all. One of the cool things that I thought this show did was it directed some of the sequences like they were an anime, but there wasn't enough of that. And so anytime it happened, it just kind of felt out of place. I wanted it to lean into that a little bit more. The character arcs as a whole felt very cliched. I wasn't invested in any of the storylines. I didn't care about these characters. The design was really cool, but unfortunately, it was designed without sightlines in mind, which drives me nuts. And so there were whole scenes that I couldn't see from where I was sitting in the theater. And I'm like hit or miss on Frank Wildhorn as a composer. There are some shows of his where I really love the entire score, But for the most part, and especially recently, a lot of his shows tend to sound the same. They tend to sound like generic pop songs. And usually there's only like one or two songs that jump out at me in one of his shows. But this one was kind of like the worst of Frank Wildhorn. Definitely a disappointment in my opinion. At number 6, I have the Broadway revival of Uncle Vanya, which actually started off really promising, especially because William Jackson Harper in this revival was incredible. Absolutely a standout. So glad he got a nomination because he was great. Anika Noni Rose, great. But this show really went off the rails in the second act and got so tedious and boring that I just did not care about any of these characters anymore. And I like Uncle Vanya as a play, but this show overall was just a huge miss for me. And ultimately, I think a big part of that for me was, even though I loved all of these actors individually, I didn't care about their relationships to each other. I just felt so disconnected from them that by the time we got to the second act, I wasn't feeling for their characters anymore because of that lack of connection. And that's hard to do in a show that's really about a lot of unrequited love, because they do lack that connection to each other, but we as the audience should at least still feel connected to them. At number 5, I have the Lucille Lortel Theater off-Broadway just in general. The only show that I saw there was Oh Mary, and Oh Mary is a delight of a play. Absolutely had a great time, except when I saw it off Broadway and couldn't see the show. The Lucille Lortel doesn't have anything blocking any of the seats except for other seats. When you're sitting up in the mezzanine, unless you are in the front row of the mezzanine, you cannot see over the people in front of you. And the biggest disappointment that I had was the fact that I paid nearly $100 for my Oh Mary ticket and got an audio play version of it. Absolutely overpriced for the seat that I was sitting in. Now, I know theater is really expensive to put on, but this was just, it felt like a scam and completely ruined my experience of seeing Oh Mary for the first time, a play that I think ultimately is a ton of fun. And also considering that this is a theater that has been putting on a lot of really expensive celebrity-driven revivals, from Danny in the Deep Blue Sea to the upcoming Andrew Scott one-person Vanya. And so they're able to charge these really incredibly high prices, which is great for them. I love that they're able to do that so they can get cool shows like Oh Mary in there. But gosh, it feels like such a ripoff when a good chunk of your audience just can't see the show. Can't see the show. What a disappointment. At number 4, I have McNeil. Now, McNeil, I will say, was better than I thought it was going to be, because I went into the show with incredibly low expectations. At this point, I had already heard pretty bad things about the show, and it was better than I expected. I really liked getting to see Robert Downey Jr. on stage, and credit where credit is due. One of my favorite things about this show is that Robert Downey Jr. chose to do a new play for his Broadway debut. Like, he chose to uplift an original play, which I think is great. I want more celebrities to do this. I love that Sadie Sink is doing this with a show that I absolutely love, John Proctor's The Villain. I would like to see this be a trend in the new year. However, I wish this had been a better play. McNeil is a play that explores the differences between how a writer takes ideas from the people around them and their own lived experiences and other works of art and compares that to AI and AI's ability to create art from all of the art that it consumes, right? Which I think is actually a really interesting concept, but it did so with these very two-dimensional characters. There were relationships in here that you didn't care anything about. You didn't care about the writer. He was kind of an asshole, which was part of the point of the show, right? Because we were supposed to not empathize with the writer in the same way that we don't empathize with AI, because AI is artificial. But I just don't think that this play as a whole stuck the landing. And it also, despite having an all-star cast, had some incredibly miscast cast members. There were some performances in here that were definitely not a good fit for the role that they were in. And when you combine that with the fact that I just don't think the text was very strong, this definitely one of the biggest disappointments of the year. But please, celebrities, keep doing original works. We love that. At number 3, I have the current revival of Our Town, directed by Kenny Leon. This wasn't it for me. Now, this was my first time seeing Our Town. It is a classic. People love this play. I've read parts of it before, but I've never seen a full production. And not gonna lie, if there had been an intermission, I probably would have been out of there. I was painfully bored in this show. Now, as a disclaimer, I did see this show rather early on in previews, and I feel very much an outlier in this opinion. I have friends who are avid theater goers who loved this revival, but it didn't do anything for me. And I understand that part of the point is that the first 2 acts are mundane because you get the payoff in the 3rd act. And even with how much I hated the first 2 acts, I did tear up a little in the 3rd act, so that was still there, but gosh, it was a painful journey to get there. I was so disconnected from this show, and parts of it also just felt incredibly outdated to me. And other than like the really cool lamps that were in this theater that looked like they were taken out from the 2019 Christmas Carol production, the design as a whole just felt really bland and all over the place. It was not a cohesive vision, in my opinion, specifically the color scheme of the costumes. And the performances as a whole, while good individually, again, similar to The Wiz, they just all felt like they were in a different show, but that could be because of how early I saw it in the run. At number 2, the only show that I have ever left halfway through because I was having a miserable time, and that is Gats. Now, if you don't know what Gats is, it is a show done by Elevator Repair Service that takes place in an office building where one worker comes in and starts reading The Great Gatsby out loud. And as he is reading The Great Gatsby, scenes are coming alive around him. And they, throughout the course of the show, read the entirety of The Great Gatsby. So this show is an 8-hour long commitment. I made it 3.5 hours, which is the first part of the show before they cut for the dinner break. And at the dinner break, I realized I could go see something else that night, and I did. I saw Mama, I'm a Big Girl Now instead, and I have zero regrets. Credit where credit is due. I kind of knew ahead of time that this probably was not going to be my thing, because I don't really love The Great Gatsby as a novel, but I was very intrigued by how they staged this, but I could not have been more bored. And it's not because this is a bad production by any means. This just absolutely was not for me in the slightest. I wanted there to be more of a through line between the office workers and the story itself, and there just wasn't. It's a very cool concept, and similar to Our Town, it explores themes of monotony, and that's just not for me, apparently. I want shows that explore overstimulation. I don't need shows that explore boredom, because I am just going to be bored watching them. And my number 1 biggest disappointment in 2024 was without a doubt Jamie Lloyd's Romeo and Juliet in the West End. This was a huge disappointment. I am somebody who doesn't even like Romeo and Juliet as a play, but I thought this production was so misguided, it had me defending Romeo and Juliet as a play. A lot of this definitely had to do with my expectations going in, because I thought that given the fact that Jamie Lloyd got me to like Sunset Boulevard, a musical that I didn't like, I thought he could do the same with Romeo and Juliet, a play that I definitely don't like at all. And that 100% did not happen. What ended up happening instead is that he got me to defend Romeo and Juliet as a play because this production was so misguided. Romeo and Juliet is a show about teenagers so overcome with their emotions and so alienated from their families that they go and do the stupidest thing they could do, right? Like it is heightened emotions. It is all over the place. And this production was anything but that. It was entirely one note. Romeo and Juliet could not have been any more emotionless. Every single choice in this production felt like it was detracting from the text itself. And unfortunately, I think this cast was incredibly talented. It was great getting to see Tom Holland on stage. Francesca Amawuta-Rivers is incredible and I think is a fantastic Juliet. And I would have loved to have seen this entire cast in any other production of the show because I think they were all really good, but the design and the direction as a whole, a miss. Fortunately, we also got Sam Gold's Romeo and Juliet last year, which did not make my top 10 plays, but was a fantastic production, and it is the first production of the show that actually got me to like Romeo and Juliet as a play. So it wasn't all bad in 2024, but the West End production, biggest disappointment by far. But most of the shows in 2024 I loved, and without further ado, here are my top 10 plays and top 10 musicals. Starting with the plays, there were so many good plays that I saw last year, and to start off with the honorable mentions that I loved very dearly but just did not quite make the list when I gotta narrow it down to 10, and that includes Oh Mary, Table 17, Job, It's a Motherfucking Pleasure, and The 20-Sided Tavern. I think these are all great and vastly different shows, but the number of plays that I saw this year was just so good that narrowing it down to 10 was incredibly tough. But without further ado, at number 10, I have Counting and Cracking. Counting and Cracking is this 3-hour-long epic about a Sri Lankan Australian family and their family history both in Sri Lanka and Australia. This not only depicted some Sri Lankan history that I knew nothing about, but also told everything in this very inventive packaging. This had some of the best direction that I saw all year with the way that they incorporated the storytellers and the ensemble into this show. And yes, it was a 3-act, 3-hour, 2-intermission long play, but it flew by. It got you invested in the story from the moment it started to the thrilling final act. What an epic piece of theater, and one of the many fantastic shows that I saw that's originated in Australia this year. At number 9, I have a tie between My Mother's Funeral and Every Brilliant Thing. Both of these were plays that I got to see at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. Both of them made my top 10 from the Edinburgh Fringe, and both of them explore the relationship between the narrator and their mother in very different and interesting ways. Every Brilliant Thing is about the narrator compiling a list of all of the things that make life worth living that incorporates the audience in a very beautiful way. And My Mother's Funeral is a play about one woman who has to pay for her mother's funeral by writing a play about somebody paying for her mother's funeral by writing a play. Very fun, very meta, very explores how we immortalize people through art. I love how both of these plays really push the boundaries on what theater can be and how we view theater as an art form. And they both had incredible writing and payoffs at the end that had me tearing up both times. Just two incredible pieces of theater. Every Brilliant Thing is definitely making the rounds in the regional theater scene, and I love that for it. I would love to see a regional production of this show, again, because I think it incorporates the audience in a really fun and brilliant way. And My Mother's Funeral is currently doing its encore production at Soho Playhouse in New York. I cannot recommend either of these shows enough. At number 8, I have Jez Butterworth's new play, The Hills of California. I loved this show. It follows 4 sisters who reunite as their mother is lying on her deathbed. And it flashes back and forth between the present and 20 years prior to the last time all 4 of these sisters were together. This is an absolutely stunning play with one of my favorite theatrical moments of 2024 with Joan going up the stairs, which is a moment I found out was not in the original production in the West End, which is mind-blowing to me because it really made the play, in my opinion. But what a beautiful piece of theater with fantastic design, especially the scenic design, and some incredible performances, especially by Lauren Donnelly, who plays 2 roles in this show. At number 7, I have All of Me. Now, I love a good romantic comedy, and All of Me is about 2 disabled individuals, both of whom rely on mobility devices and text-to-speech aids in order to communicate. And this play not only had a really great relationship at its core, but was also a really fascinating look at disability in America and the differences in experiences of disabled individuals depending on their class. And there's nothing more than I love than a romantic comedy with depth to it, and this was absolutely that. I really hope we get to see this play again, but honestly, I would love a film version of All of Me. I think it would be a really good rom-com on screen. At number 6, I have My Son's a Queer, But What Can You Do? Rob Madge's one-person show that I have wanted to see for forever. I Loved this show. What an absolute joy. I was truly devastated when this show did not come to Broadway last year, and I am so glad I was able to catch it at Edinburgh Fringe. I really hope we have not seen the last of My Son's a Queer. What Rob Madge has created here is absolutely a beautiful piece of theater about a young queer child growing up in the most loving of homes, and it really shows just how important a loving home is to any young child growing up. My Son's a Queer, But What Can You Do is truly a piece of theater that the world would be a better off place if more people saw it, and I need more people to see it. Simple as that. At number 5, I have Bad Creole, which is Dominique Morisseau's newest play and maybe my favorite play of hers. I haven't seen all of them, but of the ones I've seen, hands down my favorite. Bad Creole follows an American woman who goes to visit her cousin in Haiti following the death of their grandmother. And it really does a great job of exploring different worldviews and how the environment that we grow up in affects the way that we view the world. And this production at Signature Theater in New York was such a fantastic production, from an incredible cast to this really vibrant and colorful design. And in my opinion, this should be one of the frontrunners for the Pulitzer Prize this year. At number 4, I have Jonah, a new play by Rachel Bonds that had a stunning production directed by Danya Tamor off Broadway at the beginning of 2024. This is a play that really dives into intimacy and how our ability to be intimate with others is affected by our own personal fantasies, by our previous relationships, by the trauma that we have experienced. And I think that it did so in a very nuanced way. And the way that this play revealed information to the audience was so incredibly well done. That, combined with a fantastic cast led by Gabby Beans, made this one of my top theater-going experiences of the year. At number 2, and one of the most unique theatrical experiences I had all year, is Burnout Paradise. Burnout Paradise is a piece of theater performed by Pony Cam from Australia that I saw at Edinburgh Fringe that has 4 members of the troupe on treadmills trying to complete different tasks. And this was one of the most thrilling pieces of theater that I saw. And the way that this play was able to explore burnout culture, but also humanity and our empathy towards others. Burnout Paradise is definitely the kind of theater that gives me hope for humanity, because the show itself proves that people are willing to help you out even when it does not directly benefit them. And that is a reminder that I think everybody in the world needs. And at number 1, and also my number 1 show of the Edinburgh Fringe, is Virginia Gay's Cyrano, also coming from Australia. Australian theater really knocked it out of the park in 2024. Cyrano is a story that I don't even really like. I almost didn't go see this production because of how much I don't like Cyrano, but oh my gosh, this production really did it for me. This reimagining of the classic Cyrano story was so joyous and wonderfully queer, and I absolutely need a New York production of Cyrano in the future because it's fantastic. If you are somebody that likes Fat Ham as a play and what Fat Ham did with Hamlet, then you are going to love Cyrano and what Cyrano does with Cyrano. And finishing off with my top 10 musicals, of course we have some honorable mentions, including Dead Outlaw, Titanic, Terse, I'm Almost There, Pop Off Michelangelo, and We Live in Cairo. There were a lot of really great musicals this year, and gosh, I probably could have added even more to those honorable mentions, like the Next to Normal revival, the Ragtime concert at New York City Center. There was so much good theater this year, but I had to narrow it down to 10, and without further ado, here are the top 10. At number 10, I have Death Becomes Her, adapted from the cult classic film of the same name. This musical is just a ton of fun. And honestly, this gives me hope for big commercial adaptations, because oftentimes those big musicals adapted from well-known films can feel like a cash grab. They can feel very generic. They can feel like they're just trying to reenact these big movie moments on stage and not add anything new in the theatrical medium. But Death Becomes Her is really one of those musicals that proves that when you get the right team that is passionate about making a musical that stands on its own separate from its film, they can create a fantastic and incredibly fun work of art. Death Becomes Her has a fantastic score by musical theater writers new to the musical scene. The book is really well done and in some ways improves upon the film, in my opinion. And of course, you have the incredibly talented cast led by Megan Hilty and Jen Samard, who are stellar in this. The best musicals, in my opinion, don't just recreate the iconic movie moments, but create iconic musical moments. And this absolutely does that. And as much as I love the little indie musicals, you'll see a lot of them on this list, I love how big budget this musical feels. It's one of those shows that you go and see on Broadway and it is spectacle. You see the money that you paid for that ticket on that stage in the effects. Some of the best costume design on Broadway currently, in my opinion. Paul Tazwell has that Tony locked down this year. Big, elaborate sets, a huge, fantastically talented ensemble. This is the kind of Broadway show that feels like capital B Broadway. At number 9, I have Cats the Jellicle Ball, an absolutely terrific revival. And honestly, I think that this would be higher on this list if there was more of a story to Cats. I'm somebody that's very narrative driven. And while Cats does have a narrative, it still wasn't enough for me. But gosh, the way that this musical really gave it more of a narrative than it's ever had before, fantastic. This wasn't just a revival, it was a reinvention of Cats as a show. I really hope this isn't the last that we've seen of this show because it was absolutely stellar. And between the Sunset Boulevard revival, Cats the Jellicle Ball, and Starlight Express in London, Andrew Lloyd Webber's musicals have really been getting an incredible reinvention, despite the fact that, in my opinion, it's just not the strongest material, which makes me think that Immersive Phantom is gonna be incredible. At number 8, I have The Connector, which was an original new musical by Jason Robert Brown, and maybe my favorite Jason Robert Brown score ever? Definitely in years, but maybe ever. I loved this show. Now, it definitely wasn't everybody's cup of tea. The show as a whole definitely needs some work in terms of the character development and the way that they unfold the conflict at the heart of this show. But this is a new musical that made me excited for new musicals again. The first time that I heard this score in theater, I had a visceral reaction. I loved it. This is Jason Robert Brown truly at the top of his game. You had incredible direction by Daisy Prince, and this cast, especially Ben Levi Ross and Hannah Cruz, really stellar performances. I loved this production. At number 7, and maybe a bit of an out of left field pick, but I have The Heart of Rock and Roll. This show is tragically slept on, but it was so much fun. The Heart of Rock and Roll is an original plot set to Huey Lewis and the News music, and it had the feeling of a Disney Channel original movie for adults. And at the heart of The Heart of Rock and Roll, you have one man having to decide between moving up in a company that he enjoys working for with the woman he loves, or being the front man of a rock and roll band with his best friends. What is he going to pick? This musical was so much fun and full of twists and turns, but really what brought this show to life, in addition to its stellar cast, was the incredible choreography by Lauren Lataro. This musical had everything from a tap sequence on Bubble Wrap to an a cappella group forming a human car, to babies falling from the ceiling in a nightmare sequence. There was so much to love about this. It was big, it was colorful, it was camp. Now I understand why people thought that this show was overly cheesy, but I loved the fact that even the critics saw the vision and loved this show. Unfortunately, audiences slept on this show and it flopped. It flopped hardcore on Broadway, but we're going to see it in every regional theater someday, and I cannot wait. I cannot wait. At number 6, I have Three Houses, which is a new Dave Malloy musical that is a loose adaptation of The Three Little Pigs told from people in isolation during the shutdown. I love an inventive adaptation. You're gonna see a lot of that on the rest of this list. And I love Dave Malloy's music. This may be one of my favorite scores of his. This was an incredible production. Everything from the cast to the design of this was incredibly well done. And for anybody that was worried about art set in the pandemic, This did it beautifully, and in some ways hit a little too close to home. Dave Malloy recently ran a Kickstarter to help fund this cast recording, so we are getting a cast recording of Three Houses. I cannot wait, and I hope that we see this production again in the future. I thought it was an incredibly well done show overall. At number 5, I have Penelope from the Signature Theater in Arlington, Virginia. This is the first of the regional theater productions that I saw on this list. This is an incredible one-person show told from the perspective of Penelope waiting for Odysseus to return home from war. And a one-person show about somebody waiting sounds like it would be incredibly boring, but this show is anything but. This production starred the incredible Jessica Phillips as Penelope. She was so good in this. Absolutely broke your heart. And while this is a one-person show, she did have musicians on stage with her, and the way that they were incorporated into this show was so well done. There is a demo recording of this musical, but I hope that we get a full cast recording with the full orchestrations because they were so good. At number 4, and tragically closing today as I film this, is the future cult classic Teeth. Based off of the film of the same name, yes, that horror film about the girl that has teeth in that body part, this was such a fun musical, and in my opinion is going to follow in the footsteps of shows like Bat Boy and Heathers that originally had incredibly short off-Broadway runs, but then became cult classics later on. We also thankfully got a cast recording of Teeth this year, and if you have not listened to the score written by Anna K. Jacobs and Michael R. Jackson, do yourself a favor and give it a listen to. It is wild and one of the best new musical theater scores in my opinion. And I will always love a musical with a splash zone. At number 3, and back to a regional theater, is the AR production of Gatsby. I love that we have multiple interpretations of Gatsby that are so vastly different from each other. ART's Gatsby is definitely the Gatsby that spoke to me. I loved this production. From the fantastic direction by Rachel Chavkin to this incredible cast, including the standout Saleha Pfeiffer, who absolutely broke your heart as Myrtle. The design was stunning, and I adored this score by Florence Welch. Getting to hear Saleha Pfeiffer belt out "What of Love, What of God" is definitely a standout moment in 2024, especially with The Great Gatsby from Broadway currently making the rounds, going to London. I hope we have not seen the last of ART Gatsby because it was so good. It was so good. And I love that between Gats and The Great Gatsby and Gatsby at ART, that people have their choice for which adaptation they love. And in my opinion, ART Gatsby was definitely the production for me. At number 2, I have Half Man, Half Bull. This is a musical told in 2 parts. The first part is Theseus, the story of Theseus going to kill the Minotaur in the labyrinth. And the second part is Daedalus, the story of Daedalus and Icarus escaping from prison with the makeshift wings. I saw this at Edinburgh Fringe and I fell in love. I love Greek mythology. I love adaptations of Greek mythology, especially when they are put in a modern package. I love pieces of theater that push the boundaries on what theater can be. Daedalus had us making paper airplanes, and I want more stuff like that. I want more stories that get the audience invested and take us along for this incredible ride. And the way that both parts of the show really were able to combine multiple genres. You had spoken word, you had rap, you had folk music. Incredibly well done all the way around. This was my first show that I've seen by Wright and Granger after listening to their recording of The Gods, The Gods, The Gods, and I cannot wait to see more from them. And at number 1, and technically breaking my own rule because I did in fact see this in 2020 in Atlanta, but I wasn't doing top 10 lists in 2020, so I'm including it now because it just felt wrong to leave it off of this list, and that is Maybe Happy Ending. I love this musical. And this show is truly the little show that could, because original musicals going to Broadway have an uphill battle of really having to find their audiences as fast as possible. Before Maybe Happy Ending even opened on Broadway, there were already rumors that they were having trouble finding the funding to open in the first place. And then those first few weeks of grosses were a little terrifying. But maybe Happy Ending is not just one of the best shows of the year, but getting to see literally everybody, from critics to influencers to everybody on the internet, really rally behind this little show has been so refreshing to see. And maybe Happy Ending is such a heartwarming little musical about these two out-of-work helper bots that are just androids created to help the humans in their lives. These are two out-of-date models that are sent to essentially like a retirement home for helper bots, where they go until they essentially break down. And it follows these two helper bots, Claire and Oliver, as they form a connection with each other. It is such a simple musical that is truly a show that I can recommend to everybody. It feels like a Pixar film brought to life on a Broadway stage. I love that we get to see a science fiction musical. It's got elements of a romantic comedy in it. The original score is incredible. You can already listen to a few of the songs that they released in a SoundCloud on their website. And in my opinion, it is currently the frontrunner for Best New Musical at the Tony Awards. It is so beloved and so well done. Just make sure that if you go see it, you sit in the center of the orchestra or the mezzanine, because this does ultimately have some sightline issues, which truly is the only bad thing I can say about this show. I love it so much. I cannot recommend maybe Happy Ending enough, and I am so glad that we got it on Broadway in 2024 and that it's thriving. Those were my top shows of 2024. I cannot wait to see more theater in 2025, though maybe not 300 shows. It was a lot. I don't recommend doing it. And that is it, my top 10s of 2024. Please let me know in the comments what your favorites were. And if you haven't already, like and subscribe to follow along for all of the theater that I see in 2025, including my upcoming trip to New York, where I am seeing at least Eureka Day, Cult of Love, English, and the Audra revival of Gypsy. And I'll be talking about all of the theater that I see on this channel, because theater is life. Bye.